right, welcome back to the GDM Podcast. Today we have somebody who has been at the center of some of the biggest conversations in cannabis. You know, whether you love him or hate him, you can't ignore him. He built MedMen. He's the co-founder of MedMen, which is one of the first billion-dollar cannabis companies. And so I've been really looking forward to this conversation because no matter what you think about Adam Bierman, one thing's for sure, he's played this game at the highest level possible in the cannabis industry. And let me just say it this way: before you try to criticize him, try to build your own cannabis company and get up to $1 billion valuation. Let's see how that works out for you. And Adam's here to talk about his new book, Weed Empire: How I Battled Gangsters, Investment Banks, and the Department of Justice to Create the Cannabis Industry in America. And also a little bit of his personal journey. Let's see if we can pull back a little bit of the layers. Adam, I'm super excited to chat with you. How are you doing today?
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited. I'm stoked to do your show.
Yeah, likewise. Let's start right at the beginning. I'm interested to learn more about you personally. Can you tell me, who is Adam Bierman and how did you get here?
Well, I'm a 43-year-old man, the father of two young boys, and husband of a wife that we've been together for 21 years now. I got here as a result of just a wild journey. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, some of it's ugly, some of it's fascinating and exciting, and some of it's scary. But through these circumstances that I happen to find myself in throughout my life, exposed to so much. And, a big reason why I wrote this book is if I had been able to read a book that shared the way that I'm sharing in this book, what truly happens right behind the curtain, the exposure that I was able to, have for myself throughout this crazy journey in my life taught me so much. And if I had that information prior to starting so much of this journey or, making decisions along the way, so many of those decisions would have been different because I would have had the information needed to avoid first-timer mistakes. And so, I'm looking forward to, the results of, through this honest tale, people being able to grab for themselves, information that they hopefully will find useful as they move forward, in their own journeys.
No, I love it. Yeah, what's a good story without a little bit of drama and some hard lessons and some tragedy along the way? And so I think that's really what positions you to be a really influential person. You said it, you hit the head on the nail. People can learn from you. There's people who are just now starting off, wanting to get into dispensaries and looking up to people like MedMen's. Like, well, how can we learn from them? What can we do better that they didn't do at the time? And so, for any of those sorts of people, these entrepreneurs looking to get into the industry, what would you say, right at the top of your head, what are some of the biggest lessons that you learned that you could help them implement today?
Well, I think the biggest, as an entrepreneur first, and then as a cannabis guy second. As an entrepreneur for me, the biggest lesson I've learned in my life of business is if you are starting something, creating something, that's what entrepreneurs do, they create. If you're creating something, then inevitably the definition of success within your business pursuit must change as you achieve or move forward into your next milestone. And, not understanding that is something that definitely, looking back on my journey, right, I would have made different decisions with that understanding, right? Even when we started MedMen, the definition of success was, being able to open a store with glass windows and no, scary thing going out on, in front, actually inviting people in. Like, the definition of success in that moment, for example, was to open the West Hollywood store. That's a much different definition of success than 4 years earlier where I was when, if people read this book, with us figuring out what the cannabis landscape looked like before there were glass storefronts, and then even after, when you're a public company, success is much different, right, than what success is in operating 3 stores or 5 stores in one part of the world. So the biggest lesson is it is okay. In fact, I think it should be something that every entrepreneur pushes themselves to constantly remind and ask themselves, what is success? How do I define it? I need to put it into 1 or 2 sentences for myself so that I can inform the decisions I'm making. Are they in the pursuit of that, definition of success in the moment? And just looking at entrepreneurship and creation as something that evolves. And as it evolves, you as an entrepreneur, me as an entrepreneur, redefining what I want out of the next step.
Yeah, that was great. I think this is getting off a little bit off topic here. We're kind of touching upon. I remember I don't know if you grew up listening to or when you were younger, watched Dave Chappelle. But one of the big lessons that he gave to people once he eventually got out of the industry is to kind of know your price right up front before you get in. That way you can get out and still be happy and not be kind of regretting your decision. You're talking about these different levels of success and kind of how it evolves over time. It happens a lot with entrepreneurs. Kind of moving forward a little bit, a lot of people looked at MedMen as kind of, they compared it to Apple, and and the branding was really on point. And from my personal perspective, when I look at you and from the outside looking in, I kind of see you as somebody who's really good at sales, really good at networking. But what do you think? What are the traits and experiences you think really helped push you to the level that MedMen was at?
Yeah, and this is back to the book, why I wrote it, and what really goes on behind the curtain. I think that we were able to do so much for the industry, for ourselves building a company, for just communities, changing laws. We were able to accomplish, when I say, define success, so many things. But then the question is, because I haven't revealed what went on behind the scenes yet, and so it's the right question is, hey, the branding was on point, really getting recognized as the first mainstream, like the brand that people would wear in the mainstream, on a piece of clothing and feel confident. That must mean that between that and your ability to network, there's some magic sauce there. But the truth is that, our ability to be the first of all the things we were the first of was a consequence of what went on behind the curtain. What went on with structuring, investment into a federally illegal business and having to figure out those structures for the first time, and then go out and convince investors to buy into those structures for the first time, even though the underlying business was federally illegal. So much of the successes we had were as a result of being able to go public. But behind that curtain, what does it look like to go public when the country you're doing business in, where you're creating your money, your revenue, you're doing so in an illegal manner. And so, figuring out how to go public in a different country. So when we say what are some of those qualities? How did we get to where we were? I would say so much of that was this behind the curtain stuff where my experience, my unique experience in my journey in this world, in particular, my front row seat to the online poker boom in the early 2000s really put me in a position to be making these decisions, even though I was making them on my intuition. There weren't facts I was pulling from. We were doing it for the first time. We were able to figure things out. We got a lot of stuff wrong. We got a lot right, and we figured it out. So at the end, on the other side of being able to open a store on Fifth Avenue, I'm very proud of the way that store came together. And Andrew Modlin, my co-founder, gets all of that credit, right? He is the branding and design genius behind that. Right. But the concept of mainstreaming marijuana, our successes, our abilities to do what we were able to do, they really all came as a result of what happened behind that curtain.
Let's dive into that a little bit more because, you hit the head on the nail. Cannabis was federally illegal. It still is, these days. But you go back to 2010. Correct me if I'm wrong here. This is this is before, I'm from Colorado, this is before we had legal marijuana, and, you know, I was only 18 or 21 at the time, and, you know, I would have never thought about going into cannabis at the time, you know, and so I really want to credit you for that. But why would you think about going into cannabis in 2010 when, you know, as you're saying, it's illegal, you're going to face all this pullback? What drove you to do so?
So there's really these two moments of commitment during my cannabis journey. And, you know, I definitely account for them in depth in the book. The first moment is opening the first dispensary. It was called the Tree House in Venice, California, Venice Beach. And when I opened the Tree House, I did it fully and radically committed to making it a success, because I had no other life options. It wasn't because I had discovered the power of the plant. It wasn't because, you know, I myself was a consumer. It wasn't anything in the middle. It was truly, you know, I was without financial anything. Stability would be an overstatement, but, you know, I had been evicted from my apartment. I was living with my girlfriend in my parents' apartment. I didn't have a car. And, you know, it was about figuring out how to get myself on my feet. And I saw this opportunity. Actually, it was called the Sunset Super Shop in Hollywood. And there's a whole scene in the book. But, you know, I'm brought into one of these dispensaries to help them with their marketing. And, you know, it's like opening the door to this whole world. And, you know, I am just convinced I'm going to figure out how cannabis as a business will help me stand up on my own 2 feet. So, you know, that's that first moment, against all the reasons why you wouldn't, you know, with nothing to lose. You know, I get into cannabis and we open our first store. A few years later, there's the second moment in my journey, which is when I meet the Canna Moms in Florida, another story that's in the book. And I learn about their children, and I end up becoming very familiar and working with and being supportive of and just learning from these moms. And what that was like someone opening the door for me to understanding what the power of this plant really holds, right? And that's when it went from standing on my own 2 feet, and that was my extreme commitment, to changing the world through weed. And that became my mission. And then it wasn't until a few years later that I actually start, you know, being an everyday consumer. And then all I do is wish that I was smoking weed from day one, because I think it would have let me stay calmer longer. So my weed journey, right, is this incredible journey for me as I look at it. And, you know, at the end of the day, as I sit here now, who I am as a 43-year-old, I have that plant to thank, you know, all the way around and over and through 10 Ways to Sunday.
No, I love it, Adam. But I wanted to underline kind of your strategy for building MedMen. I would kind of refer to as death ground. You know, when you don't have another way to do it, you know, when your back's against the wall, you figure stuff out really, really, really fast. And so a big kudos to you for, you know, putting ball to the wall and just having the bravery to really stick in there and just do it. So I wanted to say that. These days, you know, after MedMen's kind of fallen, you know, on LinkedIn, social media, even in the press, you know, I see a lot of scrutiny that almost seems unfair. And so I'm interested what you think about this scrutiny, how it impacted you, and how you think the narrative should be.
That's a big one.
Yeah, we can go one by one if you want.
Yeah. What was the first part of that one?
So regarding the scrutiny, how would you respond to it? How do you think it's impacted you personally? You know, what you got going on under the hood?
It's been an incredible teacher. You know, I talk a lot in the book about Phil Stutz and the impact he's had on my life. And there are even sessions of ours that I recount in the book. One of the things that Phil Stutz didn't have to tell me more than once is if you see your name anywhere, as opposed to getting closer to read what it says next to it, turn and run the other direction. And so, that's the beginning of this caricature of mine in the public, and, any kind of commentary around that caricature. That's the beginning of that becoming a great teacher for me, because underlying all of that is, if that wasn't a handwritten note from my kid, or that wasn't a text from my wife, or it wasn't an email from a friend, then the person who wrote it doesn't know me. And if they don't know me, then why does I, as the actual person, want to go read about a caricature? It's just entertainment at the end of the day. And so, for me, that's a lesson, not just for media, that's in everything. That's when we're out and about. That's when we're with friends and family. That's when we're at the grocery store. That's when we're just doing chit chat, at a kid's soccer game. I think that's been a great teacher, is that if people don't know you, then you should have no expectations as to how they treat you or interact with you. All you can do is live with how you interact and treat the world. And so, I guess that's what I would say about part one of your question.
Yeah, no, love it. I love it. There's a lot of knowledge and wisdom in there that I hope people take and kind of pull away. Because, a lot of people get offended if they see people talking shit about them on media. But I'm curious, what do you think regarding the criticism? What has been the most unfair or set of unfair things you've seen regarding you, or maybe you don't even pay attention? And how do you think this should be corrected?
Well, I don't believe in corrections. I believe in moving forward and taking what we learn from an experience and applying it to what's next. I believe there's a lot of inevitability in my story, and I don't have any regrets as I find myself here talking to you today. I think that, and this is something that I do account for in the book and talk about, there's this moment while I'm struggling to figure out how to turn, the perception of my caricature into a teacher of mine, when I'm figuring that out and it is permeating me, there's this moment where all I think about all day is how this red army of MedMen, hoodie wearing employees across the country, who are all waking up every day believing that they are shifting the balance of the world by providing access to cannabis for people, right? As I believed at the time we were doing. I was so dedicated to that becoming a reality and doing anything I needed to do inside of that, that at the same time, as we were having more and more success along that mission, as more and more laws were changing, as more and more communities around the United States were recognizing cannabis as mainstream, as culturally, right, cannabis became more and more mainstream. The more success we had along that mission, which just consumed me at the expense of me as a human being, at the expense of me as a father, at the expense of me as a husband, the more hate that was thrown on that character. And it wasn't that I would read a story. It was literally showing up at a trade organization that we had funded to create so that cannabis could continue on a path to become mainstream in that market. It happened to be New York, calling a special conference call to say, we're calling a vote to remove Adam from the trade association because of the allegations made in this particular lawsuit. Right? So we had, figured out behind the curtain how to get to a place where we could fund a New York Trade Association when no others ever had in the way that we did. Right? We figured out behind the curtains how to put the political pieces in place to have a trajectory where a medical marijuana program that, had no chance of survival or changing anybody's mind could evolve to full adult use access in that state, how we could go ahead and create and then participate and support such a thing. And as more and more momentum happen, show up in one day for the caricature of the corporate face of marijuana to be asked to resign from that same association, right? And so for me, I think not about correcting it, and not about, well, the New York Post reported it as me getting kicked out for being a racist, which I account for in the book, which is, as crazy as that is, I'm sitting back going, these are people that don't know me. There's so many lawsuits. The more success you have, the more lawsuits are filed because people are lazy and people want to go ahead and get free money. And I happen to have this very lazy CFO that when he sued us, he did, I guess, a great job, which he just listed every inflammatory thing you could possibly list about a person's character, knowing the press would eat it up. So, I think that was the hardest part if you look back and say, but Adam, even if you didn't read it, you were aware of it. And I was aware of it. And the funny stuff was South Park. But the stuff that got to me before I figured out how to really teach myself through this was the actual, it wasn't just hatred, it was commitment to be, antagonistic towards me and MedMen, while I believed and we believed we were waking up, creating a better tomorrow for everyone, specifically those people that were targeting us and me.
Yeah, really great stuff. There's a lot of lessons in there. And, regarding the South Park, I would say personally, I think it's an honor that you get mocked by South Park as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I was honored. That one I'm honored. People in the industry that are working alongside us and opportunities are being created as a result of our efforts alongside theirs, hating on you along the way for whatever reason. That's the part that's shitty. And, to go further on that, I get it if you're just some scrappy startup industry that's not worth that much and you've got these cavalier players that just don't know how to play nice together. But this is still going on. And that's not the industry anymore. And I think one of the other parts about understanding, about this book and hopefully what people can get from it is understanding how we got to where we are today. Because we got there with these type of people, scrapping it out, figuring it out. But now we are in a much different place. And the industry has a decision to make. If they want to continue to act the way that they acted throughout my book, my belief is that this industry will not end up as so many of us had hoped it would end up, where there really is access to legal weed for adults the world over, so that this plant can have the positive impact I know it has. Yeah. We end up in a world where it's controlled by other forces. And the industry has to grow up because the hate and the stuff you're talking about with me, I get it. I was first, we were first, so there's a target on your back and people for all the reasons are going to hate and try to take that down, but we're past this. We have to get past it. Yeah,
no, love it. And let's actually move on from that. That's a really good point. Let's jump to the book. I'm really excited to kind of dive into this a little bit more. But I'm curious, why did you decide to write this book? And you kind of touched upon this a little bit also, but what do you hope people get from the book?
Well, the first part about deciding to write it, there's an acknowledgement as I stepped away from MedMen, it's been 5 years now, that I never made any effort to share any part of this journey or story as myself. I was always the spokesperson for something or someone. And when you're doing that, you take, you're trying to make a point, and to make the point, you say the things you have to say so that you can accomplish your objective, which is something I was all in on. But like you said, people have variety of made up versions of this story in their mind. And, one, I thought that I would want to put down my story because I have never put it down before. And I think my story is way more entertaining, fascinating, and much more to learn from than the fake stories that are out there. Yeah. And then as I looked into it, I realized what I keep talking about, which is I wish at 17 years old, I could have read this book, or the book, Adam, talking to myself, You Can Write, because you read all of the business biographies. But, the people that were really honest, they wrote those books when they were about to die. And the business books I read, they were wrote by journalists. They were written by journalists, right? Like, nobody's telling the truth. The truth, if it's going to be the truth, doesn't feel good all the time. And the truth, if it's going to be the truth, isn't without, some type of shame. And so you find that people are okay sharing their story so people can learn when they're on their deathbed. But then the story they're talking about happened 50 years ago. And I think, this is an opportunity for me to write a story about today. The players in this book, those are the players that are still in this industry today. The way that this book describes all these events happening, that's the way all the events in the world happen today. It's not just marijuana. We look at all the tech stuff. We look at AI. We look at the explosive new industries that are coming out of nowhere, let alone all the crypto stuff. It's not going to be a surprise to me as certain stories play out in these explosive emerging industries, because now I've seen the movie. But that's just because I've had this crazy experience. Now this book is a chance for others to dive into that experience, and as they pay attention to what's important to them, understand what's really happening.
Yeah, I love it. One part of the book, you sent me over an excerpt of the book, which was really interesting. One part that stood out to me, you were talking about going for a run and blasting Eminem, and then going over into a hotel, which you spent a considerable amount of money just to have the hotel and put on kind of a show, I think was the phrase that you used. And then you also mentioned that after getting this investment from the investor, that you essentially went broke to be having hundreds of millions in a matter of months. What was that like for you at the time? Having such a ginormous shift.
Well, I think that, the story you're talking about in New York was when we were able to pull in the first investment ever of its kind like that into a marijuana business in the U.S. Although the number was $3.75 million. I mean, you were literally saying somebody gave me $3.75 million to go be a criminal in regards to the federal government's outlook at that time, right? And, put it in Fortune magazine. So that's what you're talking about. You had to close that deal. We were on complete fumes. I was funding the business month to month, and it had gotten past where I could do that. And that was the first time where we needed outside capital in order to sustain, the trajectory we were on, and to pull it off by, rented a really nice suite and, had to, in poker, we call it semi-bluff. And I had to semi-bluff my way to closing that deal. Definitely at that point, the business was on fumes, but at least I was paying rent, and I had my Prius. It wasn't, the desperate spot I was in when we started and opened the Treehouse. And it would be a few years later until I was in the position where I was the public company CEO. I think what's important to understand there is, as the CEO of the public company, we had we raised $100 million. And we used that to grow the business, across the country. And we had a stock that we could use to also help grow the business across the country. But as I account for in the book, and this is also why I hope people will read this, because so unashamedly I'm sharing it, right? There's a point in the book where there are advisors very much smarter than myself on how to manage personal wealth that come into my office and interrupt me during one of my days on my mission to tell me that I need to sell some of my stock and diversify. And I kicked them out. And so, it's one of these things where, I want people to understand that, because there are lessons throughout and definition of success and all the rest of it. The same guy that wouldn't take no for an answer when we were trying to list this federally illegal business in a foreign country, right? If that guy doesn't slow down and say, what's my new definition of success? Of course, he's kicking the financial advisors out of his office, because we're building American Airlines and changing the world. I would never, not be all in. So me personally, I never had access to hundreds of millions of dollars as a result of this. This allowed me to create an amazing life for me and my family. But it wasn't one of those, founder scenarios and I created a multi-billion-dollar company and I have $100 million cash out. I never did that. I never did that all the way down to when the last, as I call them, soulless suit that took this thing over, put it into its bankruptcy. All I did was sue the company for how they threw me out, win that lawsuit, and then never recoup the money they were supposed to pay me as they did file that bankruptcy. So I was on the other side. And in that, way more lessons than me telling you a story about, I went from broke and then I had $200 million in the bank and this is what everyone should do. It's like, no. If I had read this book, maybe before I went through that journey, then maybe I would have cashed out more stock because I would have remembered that moment in the book when Adam went through it. And my hopes are in me being that transparent and honest and letting people into my life and my family's life that way, that there's lessons that people can apply, again, going forward to live their better life.
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of are the fall guy, when people are looking at MedMen and why it collapsed or whatever. I'm curious to think what you think about that and if there were other factors. And maybe this is something in the book as well. I'm curious to hear what you think. What factors led to the fall outside of Adam Bierman?
So it's one of those things. It's like the caricature question. So like on the caricature level, the founder, CEO, face of it, the company isn't doing well and they're the problem. And I get that. And as the CEO and everything that we went through from the first day, of course, I made bad decisions every day. I was making a lot of decisions and a lot of them were wrong. And that was something I tried to own on a daily basis. And so that caricature being the fall guy, that makes sense. It couldn't be further from the truth, right? And the truth is so much more interesting because the truth is everything that happens behind those curtains before in the media, someone's a fall guy. And the truth gets back to what I keep saying, which is like how the world works. You create something the way that we created it, so much value as quickly as we did. And there's people that want to have their piece of it. Yeah. And it's no longer about, a mission. So it's one of those things that that makes sense to me. If you look at, the trajectory of MedMen and you want to talk about not only behind the curtains, but just the facts and figures and like just the truth, is that being first, everything trajectory wise for us was first, good and bad. So we were the first $1 billion US weed company. And then there were 5 more. We were the first, public unicorn. And then there were 12 more. We were the first to triple our stock value. And then there were 5 more. We were the first to lose 90% of our stock value when the bubble burst. And then everybody else has in turn also. There isn't a single marijuana company that's currently publicly traded that hasn't gone through a 80 to 90%, decrease in their value at a certain point. We just did it years earlier. So, it makes sense to me as the guy looking at this in the caricature and saying that's a fall guy. But you're just talking about the trajectory of the birth of an industry. And there was a bubble and the bubble burst. And then you had the values, basically go to almost nothing. And then you had some survivors and you had some consolidation. And now you have everybody, holding their wallet, waiting for something to change so that they can, hit growth mode again. But MedMen's no different. It just was always first. And you know what? I think to this day, we just happen to do it the loudest. But I think those two things are connected. You can't be first without being the loudest, right? And so I understand that.
Yeah. But I think from the outside looking at least another big factor that you discuss in your book as well is the Department of Justice's scrutiny of cannabis deals, including the MedMen's acquisition or intended acquisition of PharmaCann. And from the outside looking in, it kind of looks like maybe there was some political motivation there, and then maybe it also kind of contributed to some problems. What do you think?
Well, first on the PharmaCann deal, that's a section of the book that I went into real detail on, and if someone really wants to understand what happened, it's in there. And again, how the world works, like I wish I had read that. But that was, we were on a growth at all cost, trajectory and modality, and that was where we were finding our success. And the next big leap was to acquire a company that filled out the rest of the country for us. And when we made that leap and we actually signed those deal docs, everybody assumed it was going to happen. Myself, all the way down to the investors and the analysts on, Bay Street and Wall Street. And so what they do when you're a public company is they bake in, that jump. It's not like you announce it and then the stock stays the same. You announce it and you get credit for it almost already happening. And so once that happens, there's an expectation. And then on the other side, for me, and I'm fully committed, there's millions of dollars being spent to bring this whole other organization into the fold. What I didn't know at the time, and I wouldn't learn until later, was that the Attorney General of the United States had found it important to him to direct his underlings to squash that deal, even though there were no legal reasons or regulatory reasons to squash it. It was strictly because he did not want to see the cannabis industry succeed. And so there's something called HSR review, which is something that the Department of Justice uses when T-Mobile goes to buy Sprint. And they say, wait a second, if you're creating a monopoly, we've got to look at this.
Yeah.
We were literally buying a company that was operating in states we weren't operating in. And if you want to get crazier about it, in a federally illegal business where we couldn't even pay taxes as a legitimate company. But now they want to get involved and review us like we're Sprint and T-Mobile. And every lawyer that we had to bring on, it was clear looking at it, there is no reason for them to interfere. But nonetheless, they did. And it was so protracted that it ended up being, one of the final, combo punches that, took me out of the game for good. The fallout after that deal blew up.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because it's something completely out of your control. You couldn't have stopped, or you couldn't really have stopped their scrutiny. You couldn't have stopped them trying to block you. And it seems, from your perspective, that it seemed to be politically motivated and anti-marijuana, which, given the industry history, it makes a lot of sense. But another interesting part of your book is when you talk about federal agents showing up at your house, or MedMen offices, and that specifically you weren't worried about it. And so I'm curious what that was like for you, and why were you so sure that you guys hadn't done anything wrong, given that, it's a business, there's tons of different people, and, maybe you didn't even do anything, but maybe one of the underlings or, one of the managers of this. But what do you think?
Well, that was in connection with this HSR review. They actually came and took all the data from our corporate headquarters. Again, just as a tactic, employing, being employed to, the result that Bill Barr was looking for. I wasn't worried about it because we had nothing to hide. It was so black and white for us. It was so crystal clear that we were in the clear. I just believed it was perfunctory. I really thought it was the largest merger in the history of weed thus far. Everything we did like that, because of how loud it was, garnered all the scrutiny, and we always had to jump through extra hoops when we did stuff like that for the first time. And I just chalked it up to that. I had no idea. But I was always, from the moment we got into this industry, from the moment MedMen was birthed, I was always looking over my shoulder. And again, I think that's something that I was set up for based on my previous life and all my experiences, and I account for it in the book. But I was so paranoid that I never believed I had anything to worry about in moments like this. And so this is just, one of hundreds of moments like this where, if I had anything to be worried about myself, I would have freaked out in a different way. But, I always knew this day was coming. I always knew there'd be a day where the federal government would be, in our offices, because the success we were seeking in a federally illegal business trying to change the world's, understanding and our culture around this plant, we understood who we were pissing off. And I just knew one day they would show.
Yeah, so maybe that's why you weren't even worried in the first place, kind of saw it coming and, calculated risks that you were taking along the way. And kind of on that topic, you mentioned a lot of moments where, your resilience, confidence, and calculated risks kind of played a role in your growth. I'm curious on the flip side, if you think that also kind of played a role in some mistakes that were made by the company.
Of course, you cannot have one without the other. As a poker player, it would be like saying, well, playing the hand that way that you won, I assume if you play it 20 times that way, it's also going to contribute to some of the times when you lose. And the answer to that is absolutely. You can't have one without another. Just like, in that moment, myself, I can't go from this is my mission, I'm changing the world, I'm all in, and I want everyone in the world to know how committed I am to, and I'm peeling money off the table, selling stock to, be secure. You can't be both things at the same time for me, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, absolutely. And kind of seeing what you've seen, after rising and falling a little bit, what have you learned about these things like leadership, loyalty, and resilience? What are some kind of takeaway lessons that you've learned through your experiences with MedMen that you maybe don't share in the book?
I don't share in the book.
You can talk about what you share in the book too.
I had to get to a place where I was processing so much information and making so many decisions on so many fronts at all times that it taught me efficiency in the world of business. And what I mean by that is, there is so much time wasted in connection with a business objective, right? Our goal is to open this store. Okay, well, we're going to have a meeting to talk about opening the store. Then we're going to have a call. Then this person wants to come into your office. Well, I can't make a million decisions a day and have that much time contributed around opening the store. So how do you become more efficient about it while also not losing your humanity? Because we're not robots. And so I think, one of the big things for me in taking away that I apply now that I find so productive for myself is through transparency, over communicative transparency, I seek to create business efficiency. And what I mean by that is if we are opening a new store, and I believe that through 2 emails and a 10-minute conversation, we can put our initial plan together before we have a meeting because we'll have more information. If before I even start, we have a 10-minute conversation about the fact that there's a reason why we are going to be so efficient with our time. And it's not because we're curt, and it's not because we don't want to be talking to each other. It's because we'd like to free that time up for personal time where we can talk about other real things or with other people. But when we're in our business mode, there is a defined objective. And how can we use our time as efficiently as possible together to get there? I can tell you we wasted so much time at MedMen as I was learning this skill. You can imagine having over 1,000 employees across all these different disciplines and trying to figure out how to keep everybody supported and trained and, and organized. So much time, but it was great lesson for me that now I apply to myself going forward.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of looking back, in what ways do you think MedMen changed the perception, especially the public perception of cannabis? Do you think that you kind of led the way for people that are having some success today? I'm curious to hear what you think.
I think that we played our part at our moment in history. I think that, cannabis in the United States became not only illegal or criminalized, but also stigmatized, in this reefer madness insanity, now you're talking many, many, many decades ago, right? And between then and today, I think that you have a chronology where there's been a movement to undo that, right? And to get to a place where cannabis is not only legal and accessible, but it's destigmatized and mainstreamed. And I think that along that journey, right, we showed up and we played our part during our time. And our part during our time was to completely bring over cannabis into the mainstream culture by way of finance. Because at the end of the day, for something to be mainstream in American culture, it has to be mainstream in the financial community as well. That is just a truth. And so by bringing it mainstream in the financial community, by making cannabis relevant to the financial community, financial media, the financial world of investors, the general public and retail investors buying stocks on their phone, what we were able to do is we were able to bring cannabis over to that level of mainstream. And maybe being able to buy a cannabis stock on your phone when you've heard about it on CNBC was even more important than us opening a store on Fifth Avenue, right? In the vein of mainstreaming marijuana, up for debate. For me, they're both important. And that's why, we did them both.
Yeah, kind of diving in a little bit deeper. Do you think, we were touching about this a second ago, but I'm curious if we can kind of pinpoint a more solid answer. Do you think that there's one thing that we can say that went wrong?
Went wrong? Well, how about one of the worst decisions I made when I had a choice? Would that be a good place? So one of the worst decisions I made when I had a choice was to sign a deal with Gotham Green for a $250 million loan into the business at a point in time when the business really was doing well and had a chance to build upon itself, and we had other options. And I made a decision to take a swing at the biggest of the options, understanding very little about what I was walking into, but understanding I was walking into the, letting a fox into the hen house, as it was explained to me at the time. And that fox ended up eating a lot of my hens.
Love the analogy. Another thing that you broke down earlier that I'd like to dive in a little bit more, and you obviously go into great detail in your book on this, is the lawsuit from your CFO. And so, obviously at the end of the day, the judge eventually ruled in your favor. But I'm curious how you felt when those allegations first came about, and if you felt that you were treated unfairly by the media.
Well, definitely in the book. And how I actually felt recounted for in the book with what I did, who I called, and what transpired. That lawsuit, as salacious as it was and ridiculous as it was, it was, I guess, easiest for the racial made-up stories to stick. Those were the best, I guess, clickbait headlines. And at the time, we had just finished filming what I thought would be a Super Bowl commercial starring Jesse Williams, who was the face of Black Lives Matters. And my biggest political supporter was Herb Wesson, an African-American in Los Angeles on the head of the city council. And the bombshell is dropped and it's across the board, but that's what gets picked up on. And so, how I was feeling in that moment is, okay, well, whoever's going to write about whatever they're going to write about doesn't know me, but I actually have people that do know me, and they're going to have to read this too. And so I do get into that in the book, but that is a fucked up feeling.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, once again, this is Adam Bierman. If you don't know him already, he wrote a book called Weed Empire: How I Battled Gangsters, Investment Banks, and Department of Justice to Create the Cannabis Industry in America. That's going to be dropping soon. What date is that release again?
April 22nd.
April 22nd. So definitely be on the lookout for that. Just a few more fun questions for you, Adam. You don't have to answer them if you're not comfortable, but I'm curious. First of all, can you tell me about the first time you tried cannabis?
7th grade, Taco Bell and public park with a couple friends from school, building pipes out of mechanical pencils, And then not really knowing that I wasn't high because we probably were smoking oregano that was sold to us by some local dealer that ripped us off.
What do you remember about the first time you actually got high then? Would that be years down the line, or was this maybe?
No, that's probably once I figured it out after I thought that was fun to try that at first experience. No, 7th and 8th grade, I smoked weed like every day. And then, you know, as it was at that time and the way I looked at the world and my parents and the people around me, you know, being a stoner was the reason that I wasn't doing well at school. So with that logic, I stopped smoking weed. And I think, again, maybe if I continued, I would have done even better in school. But kids shouldn't smoke weed. You shouldn't smoke weed until your brain is fully formed. The science is there. That's what they say. In all honesty, in all reality. So I stopped, and I didn't smoke weed again until we actually had MedMen. It just was in my life in that way. And then when I got into the business, it was like, well, for sure you shouldn't, because you don't want to mix your personal, and that's how I thought about it. You know, my personal interest with the business, like, let's just go ahead and look at this strictly as a business, not a consumer. My eyes had to be reopened, you know, to me a couple years later.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. You're kind of the exception to the brain is still developing argument rule, you know, to a certain extent. These days, you know, you said you're 42, I think you said, you know, I would imagine you don't like getting
43.
43. I would imagine you're not like super high all the time or whatever, and you probably are more of a moderation guy, I would assume, from the outside looking in. But I'm curious, what is your favorite cannabis product and way to consume these days?
Well, my favorite strain of all time is Durban Poison. I live in Costa Rica. I have not seen or heard about it here. But if it was here, that's what I would be smoking on a daily basis. I'm a big sativa guy. I'm a big flower guy. I guess that's old school or simple, but that's my answer. No,
sativa is where it's at. I'm 100% with you there. You know, it doesn't put you into couch as indicas do, you know, but last question for you, Adam. I definitely respect your time, but you know, knowing what you know, looking into your crystal ball, what is the next 4 or 5 years of the cannabis industry going to look like?
Well, I think either the industry will innovate and the industry is going to figure out how to cross over into the mainstream shopping experience. The industry and the brands in the industry will get outside of a weed store and they will sell effects-based products, perhaps using cannabinoids in the mainstream. Or I think that the current marijuana industry will end up, to a large extent, going away and being replaced by the companies that own the effects space today. Effects being, you know, alcohol, tobacco, and as you see, those multinational conglomerates are exploding when it comes to their value, and they are growing. So you're in a situation where they're looking for growth. And they've already gone outside of I sell cigarettes. Now it's I sell you this effect. You want it in a pouch in your lip. And so there's no reason that the effect also couldn't be, you know, a THC-like buzz or a CBN effect for nighttime. It's just a function of who's going to own that. And I don't think that consumers are going to continue forever to go out of their way to have a unique shopping experience at a brick and mortar retailer where they only can buy a single product. I just don't think that that's going to sustain.
Love it. Thanks again for coming on, Adam. This has been really, really interesting conversation. I definitely appreciate your time, and definitely looking forward to seeing how this book works out for you and any future ventures you have and staying in contact. But thank you so much for coming on.
Back at you. I respect the living daylights out of your efforts and your intentions, and it was a pleasure to be on your show.
Hey, Sam here. Thanks again for listening to the GDM Podcast. So we do websites and SEO for cannabis brands and operators, and we do things a little bit differently here at GDM where we can promise results within weeks rather than months. And so if you're looking to sell more ounces, bongs, other premium products, start selling some more weed, get in touch with us at Green Dispensary Marketing to learn more. Thanks again for listening and hope you have a great day.